Seller resistance is a big part of this. Like, you can put all the tools out in the world, but if your sellers don't use those tools, it's not going to help. So initially, we tried to roll out these agentic AI use cases. It didn't go well. Once we got adoption over 80%, opportunity conversion by about 15%, revenue per seller when adoption went up was like 9 point something percent. For us, it was pretty dramatic.
Welcome to GrowthDecoded, MarketStar's podcast for B2B sales leaders who want to cut through the noise and get into how sales organizations actually execute across different growth stages, shifting markets, and increasing complexity. At MarketStar, we run sales programs for some of the world's leading technology companies, about 4,000 sales professionals deployed across all our client programs around the world today. And over the past couple of years, AI has gone from something we were testing on the edges to now today something that's very central to how we operate. We've built it into our workflows, our enablement, and all our tools. And our philosophy is what we like to call AI plus AI, which is artificial intelligence plus actual intelligence. So it's human steering, technology amplifying, not replacing the seller, but multiplying what the seller can do every day, which is exactly what today's podcast and conversation is all about. Because if you're a CRO or a sales leader in 2026, you're past the what should we do with AI question. In fact, your board has probably already answered that. The real question is now, how do you actually make it work? And how do you get from a pilot all the way to full scale and implementation? And where does the human still matter? And where does that human still matter most? There's actually no one better placed to answer that than our guest today. Alec is the Global Sales Director for AI Business Process at Microsoft, working across telco, media, and gaming, and some of the most complex, high-velocity B2B sales environments in the world. He's not just selling AI, he's embedding it into how enterprise organizations try and turn it into real sales outcomes. He sees what works, he sees what stalls, and he sees what leaders get wrong. So Alec, it's great to have you today. Thanks for joining us.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Alec, from where you sit at Microsoft, selling AI into complex enterprise environments, what's actually fueling urgency right now? Is it board pressure? Is it the C-suite? Is it genuine operational need? Or is it something else? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so when I think about urgency, there's a few different things that come to mind for me. I think there's a lot of urgency from IT organizations today that are really wanting to funnel in AI use cases. There was an event I was at in New York, and I think somebody quoted that business cases are actually outpacing IT's ability to go and deploy solutions, which kind of feels relevant here. And really what I mean by that is, like, there's a lot of competitive fear by not releasing agentic AI solutions, especially in the sales space. We see a lot of organizations really being fueled by having a competitive advantage or not having a competitive advantage. And so, for what I do here at Microsoft, I support a lot of our telco, media, and gaming customers. And they all have that same feeling of just wanting to have a competitive advantage here. One of the things that we see as like an ROI that sometimes fuels this urgency is there's a couple studies done that was showing that basically every dollar that you invest into generative AI in the sales space, you can get up to a $3.50 return on it. And so whenever we share stats like that, or we have customers come to us with stats like that, it's something that kind of resonates, where it's like, not everyone's seeing that return. So if they're not seeing that return, why aren't they seeing the return, and what do they have to do to see it? So it's like, if they see their competitors having this, like, we see that really fueling urgency quite a bit.
It's interesting. And when you talk about returns, one of the most used words in everyone's calls, everyone's meetings when it relates to AI is like undertaking a pilot, getting a pilot going, right? We hear about pilots running everywhere, right? Where we feel we're not seeing as much pull through into scale is where there's that gap of being able to identify the ROI case earlier on during the pilots. Like, what's your opinion on where you've seen that $1 in, $3.50 out? Where does it kind of align to from a kind of a sales program point of view or a sales workflow point of view?
I think of a production facing solution that you're actually testing. And whenever I see organizations looking at doing a pilot, it's always kind of starting with a small scale. So let's say they have a population of sellers that's 200. Their pilot's going to maybe focus on 10 of those folks to kind of start. When you just focus on 10, though, I think something important to keep in mind, the technical dollars to deploy that is the same. So the integration cost, like whatever work you're doing to go deploy these solutions, you're paying that amount of money to go deploy the solutions just for 10 people. And oftentimes you have a very similar runway to get that off into production, just so that 10, a small subset of your population, so you can prove it out. So when you see organizations spending time and effort on small scale pilots, that's kind of a red flag often. And sometimes you can't get away from it. You don't want to put your business at risk. You want your sales team to be well set up. And so if it's very experimental, you want to start small. Where I've actually been seeing a lot of success is putting guardrails around what you call a pilot before you even get started. Meaning, why don't we see what we can go do in 10 days and not worry about like, hey, what's the population of people we're going to deploy this with, but like, what can we build in 10 days and what value can we get out of it? And so when I see IT teams doing that, they're rapidly putting pilots out or tests out so that their business teams can consume these, and then they're getting almost immediate feedback. And so you're not keeping your teams focused on this pilot for months that might fail after 4 months of deployment with 10 people.
And that's really where I think over the last couple of quarters, we've seen our own business kind of dial in what is the appropriate size. And sometimes that has to be considered in kind of the motion or time to value from a sales process point of view. Because I think anytime we've deployed something that's worked, we've had a good articulate sort of hypotheses of what the impact should be. And then the next phase in kind of deciding how to implement is size of program or size of pilot versus how quick you will get to some data that's meaningful, right? And you make a great point just around the same amount of resources from a technology point of view to be invested in to get pilots going. But really you want to have a control group that you can really isolate as many variables as you can, but still be big enough to give you enough meaningful data to make some quick decisions. Alec, budgets are clearly moving fast, very fast into AI and the whole category. But in your opinion of what you've seen deployed into pilots and projects over the last year or maybe 2 years, do you think that money has in all cases been very well spent? Are we still mostly having some acceptable failed investment because we're somewhat still in an experimental stage?
You know, it's funny, if I rewind 3 years ago, I would say probably not, because I think there was a real sense of urgency to just get started. And I'm sure you saw that as well, meaning we have generative AI now. Everybody should be using it. Where and how do we use it? And I think the narrative was like, just go and do it. Just go turn it on, see what happens. And I see that's why you see a lot of reports from research agencies that show, hey, there hasn't been a lot of return on investment in this space. There's like a lot of lost capital that went into this. And when I look at how organizations were deploying this early on, it really doesn't surprise me. But I think they're getting a lot smarter now, meaning I'm not seeing organizations hurry up and rush to go deploy something. I'm seeing organizations know exactly what they want, and they want help on how to do it as effective as possible and as quickly as possible. What I hear more than anything is like time to value. Like that's what I hear. in every conversation that I have, whether it's sales, whether it's service, whether it's anything else, is if I go and deploy the solution, when do I start seeing value? And it's different in my mind than an ROI conversation, because an ROI might span 4 years, right? Like you might, depending on what you're deploying, it might take a long time to get that return. But I think it's when do I start seeing that value? Because I think organizations are like, okay, well, I spun up generative AI and I didn't see any value, right? And it was out there for a year and I still didn't see value based on what I was paying. It was expensive or whatever that was. And so really, I see this being spent quite a bit better. There's another topic that is interesting here to me when you think of just AI budgets in general, which is you have a salaried employee or like a sales employee or an organization that you're paying, and then you have your token spend with that. So like I think it was last week, NVIDIA, like their CEO Jensen made a comment that perked my ears that I think lines up with this, which is he expects his $500,000 salaried engineers to spend $250,000 in token cost, meaning he wants someone getting paid that much to be getting that paid that much to be using AI at such a rate that it's actually consuming half of what that salary employee is paying. And so when I look at that, where I think somewhere like NVIDIA, at least they're probably more advanced than a lot of organizations in that space in particular. And you extrapolate that back to what we're talking about here with sales, like I can't but think like a version of that is going to be what our future looks like, where there's going to be a value element tied to how much you're actually spending on AI tooling once you have it dialed in to the point that you really know exactly the value you're going to get out of every token that you purchase.
Alec, if we cut through the noise, which AI applications in sales are consistently delivering what you would consider kind of real measurable value right now?
Yeah, that's a big question. So there's a few. There's low-hanging fruit, as I like to call it, that I'll mention because I think it's often overlooked, but it's important. So like meeting intelligence is number one. Like if you think about a business to business seller and their day to day, maybe they start working at 8, they stop working at 5 p.m. and they've been on calls for that entire time. One of the largest, I think, value propositions that we got early on was being able to record and transcribe a meeting, right? Like that was huge. On our side, that was very little help initially, because what do you do with that transcript? You were still, you had these notes, what did you do? And so what Microsoft saw was really around how do we start leveraging all of that meeting or call information into our system of record, where maybe you have an opportunity that 12 people are working on it. And then you have one person responsible for updating this opportunity and the flow of how that opportunity is going, even though the deal team around it is 12 people. And so that created a lot of friction that everyone just kind of got used to. So like what we've done is really layered that with tooling that auto updates that opportunity, that really does a good job at parsing out exactly what you need in that opportunity for each person on the deal team, so that it's not heavy and that it's very strategic. So meeting intelligence, number one. The second one is around like just account research and meeting prep. And so it's like, we see like 95% of like workflows in the sales space start with research using AI, meaning if you have sellers and you don't give them AI tooling, they're going to go get their own AI tooling that you don't have any control or mechanism over to research whatever they're doing. And so I think that's an important stat when I think about this, that if you're not giving your organization or your sellers these tools to use, they're going to go use them on their own anyway, 95% of the time. The last one is like pipeline analytics, and then being able to identify like deal risk. So how is pipeline, like if you think about, and I'm sure you have experience with this too, if you think about a seller's pipeline and reading up to their leadership, and then their leadership bringing up to their leadership, and then it just bubbles all the way up. Like how much time do organizations spend managing pipeline analytics and then knowing what deals are at risk or not? And so we have a lot of very specific AI agents that actually have the capability to identify if a deal is at risk or not based on all of those inputs from meeting intelligence, the other research. So that's kind of how we're framing it. So those are the apps that Microsoft uses that have an agentic AI approach and where we actually see a lot of value coming from it.
And same at MarketStar. Funny you should say that, Alec. I think one of the first things that we were able to see as a kind of a way to enhance our value to our clients was actually being more crystal clear and more insightful around market sentiment. Yes, you're absolutely right. The immediate sort of advantage from being able to not just record calls, but to summarize them in ways, and then to look at aggregation of data and trends in a different way, to be able to bring back a voice from our clients' markets back to them in almost real time, without number crunching to be done. It allowed us to actually be a little bit richer in weekly business reviews as opposed to our former process, which would be giving more insight in aggregate and more of a quarterly cycle. And what does that allow us to do? It allows us to make kind of better strategic recommendations of how to pivot and what to double down on, which has given us and our teams the opportunity to enhance our revenue production, our value proposition to our own clients. So it's funny that you kick that off as your first point, because that was where we were able to not just see an advantage, but actually turn that into a value equation. And the way we work at MarketStar is when we unlock revenue for clients, it tends to be a metric or a paradigm where our clients can invest more with us. So that was interesting one. That was kind of the first level we see. You mentioned the word friction, right? I think it is a word that's probably brought up a lot when you start talking about AI and piloting and scaling pilots. So you've mentioned three categories that you've seen sort of work most frequently. Just for our viewers today, what would you say is some of the most common friction points you've seen, either within organizations or even between sort of cross-functional teams as they try to work together to try and decide on where to implement, what's the right prioritization of focus, and how to get the rubber to meet the road? What would you say are the top maybe 2 or 3 friction points that people, if they're observing them, they should say, okay, well, this is we're not unique here. This is friction that our peers may face, or even things that you could suggest and recommend that could help our viewers today maybe circumnavigate and avoid?
It's a really good question. I think about a few different things. So there's 2 elements. So like, hey, what's the friction of using agentic AI? And then like, what's the day-to-day friction that we're kind of trying to solve for? So there's a couple things we see. First off, agentic AI in general is a pretty big buzzword in the industry right now. One of the things that I always like to call out is that I don't think there's a world you have one AI agent helping you with everything that you're doing. Where we see a lot of success is having multiple purpose-built AI agents that have an orchestrator on top of it, whether it's a human or another AI agent, that type of thing. And then the biggest friction point, like outside of the pure kind of software piece, is really people. So no clear ownership. We see a lot of seller resistance. And so I'm curious too if your teams have seen this. Like whenever Microsoft started our own, what we would call sales transformation journey, seller resistance is a big part of this. Like you can put all the tools out that you really want in the world, but if your sellers don't use those tools, it's not going to help. So initially we tried to roll out a lot of these agentic AI use cases. It didn't go well, so we went through an adoption period. Since then, we've been seeing, I think a couple stats that come to mind is like we increased opportunity conversion by about 15% once we got adoption over 80%. And then like revenue per seller when adoption went up was like 9 point something percent, like 9.5%. We had an increase as well, which was, for us, it was pretty dramatic and meaningful. And then the last one I'll give you that's kind of back to the software side a little bit is really like where your data sits and how you architect your data before you start any of these transformational processes in sales, I think is key. And so I think you think initially of maybe like where your CRM is, but it's not just that, it's like where all of your data is. So if I want to make an AI agent that's going to be a meaningful and not frictional to my organization, can you get all of your data that AI agent needs? Maybe or maybe not. It depends how you've architected it and how you set it up. And so it's really those three things that kind of come to mind to me. So making sure you have a really clear line of, hey, what does your agentic AI strategy look like? Where does your data sit? And then how are you going to get your organization to actually adopt tooling that's going to make a meaningful difference?
That's very interesting, Alex. So my next question was going to be, if you were advising a CRO, tomorrow morning, CRO, first time kind of engagement, in your calendar tomorrow morning, they've got a budget, they've got C-suite kind of backing to really run an initiative. Would be that the first place you would start? Is it really going to be a conversation around where does the data reside and what can be pulled together from an agentic point of view? Or would you come at it the other way and look at it about kind of what would be the quickest path to influence some sort of revenue impact? Meaning, would you advise a sort of a down and dirty to get started approach first? Or would you really start advising on trying to get the data in a place where it could have long-term application for any future variants of what could be automated and be leveraged through agentic forces?
Yeah, I would take a slightly different approach. So there's like three phases that I bucket organizations into, which there could be 15, but there's three, and it's like automation phases. So phase one, you can think of, you have an AI agent interacting to decipher maybe leads. Phase two is that you have your sales reps getting information from that AI agent. And then phase three is you have your sales reps managing AI agents to go close deals for them, right? So phase three is very futuristic, but I like to say, okay, where's the organization at today? And then I would have a different answer for all three of those. For phase one and phase two, for me, I actually like to start not technical at all. And so we do a lot of work internally at Microsoft with customers we work with to do what we call envisioning, which is just a thought exercise. So if you think about Claude Code, which I think you're going to be very familiar with, they released Claude Code. It was wildly successful. And they put in a new feature that said planning mode, which was you put on planning mode and it was like 87% of the time it was more successful than if you didn't do that before you actually let it code. So then somebody asked the product manager for Claude Code, like, what is planning mode? Like, what would you think of it? All it is a prompt injection. And it says, before you do any work at all, create a plan. And so I think about that and I look at where I see organizations fail. And back to your question of, hey, where would you start? I would get your business team and your IT team in a room together, and I would have a really thoughtful envisioning session of what is the problem that you want to tackle? What are the obstacles? Who are the stakeholders? What are potential things that come up you're not thinking of? And what's the value you're going to get out of it? Because so many times we see an organization, IT leading one thing to try to go do something for the business, and then they don't work together. And so being able to start in one place and have that unified vision, like that saves months, if not years at times. And it really solves quite a bit before you even get started. So that's always a starting point that I would recommend if you're early on. If you're down the road, then let's say phase three, right? You would assume if somebody gets to phase three, they've kind of already done that, I would hope, or some form of that. They're very aligned because they're advanced. If you're in phase three, then I think it's kind of back to what have you started seeing value already? Like if you haven't seen value, like why not? And then maybe you go back to square one. Maybe it is the architecture, or maybe it's a misalignment between multiple organizations internally.
Well, we're talking a lot about the agentic side of the equation, but I think we should still talk about sort of the human in the loop in the sales environment, right? So let me ask you a question with a kind of a two lenses, maybe from your own perspective of what you've seen and what you've been involved in projects, and then maybe a Microsoft position. And the question is, what do you think is now and even in the future, Alec, will still be the uniquely human element that still needs to be involved in sales, and very particularly enterprise sales?
I'll say, speaking for like my thoughts and what I see, and even how Microsoft is building all of our products, we don't have AI agents that don't require a human in the loop. Now, there's AI agents that can do everything a human can, beginning to end, in very specific use cases. But then if it identifies an issue, it still escalates to a human. So when I look at how our product team is developing these things, like what is uniquely human, I think at the end of the day, trust comes to mind. Like if a human's not in the loop, is another organization going to trust, right? Like, are they like, I don't see, to your point around like focusing on enterprise companies, I don't see a world where another enterprise company goes to a Microsoft AI agent on a website and makes a large purchase, right? Like there's a huge amount of trust. And I think the second thing is around like partnership, meaning a lot of our enterprise customers we value and we see as strategic partners with us. So it's a joint venture where we're doing these things together. And I don't see like a world where an AI agent removes trust. Like we're all kind of in this together. And I think we're looking to accomplish similar goals together. And then the obvious one is just judgment calls, right? Like there's going to be ambiguous things that AI is going to need a human to make a judgment call in. And it's not going to make those decisions on its own. And if you're writing solutions, or if you're in sales and you're not making those judgment calls, like to me, that's a very big element. So it's trust, it's partnership, and partly too, it's like empathy and understanding is a big part of it in my mind. But I'm going to ask you the same question back. Like if you think about what you do at MarketStar, like what's unique to the human experience here that you don't think is ever going to go away?
Enthusiasm, right? You know, the ability to negotiate. And I think we are all about trying to drive the efficiency of our sellers. We don't have a lot of clients who are sort of saying, hey, MarketStar, we have an ambition to reduce all human sellers from our route to customer, for a number of reasons, Alec. I think there's some legitimate concern around the buyer experience and not wanting to be felt downstreamed by not having to deal with a human. So really the drive on us is just to see what way we can produce a greater X output through that efficiency. But the ability to negotiate, like you said, build trust. And I think sales to a great degree is really conveying, requirement to fit in an enthusiastic way. And I actually think a well-equipped human seller to be highly efficient, reducing the drag of things that they maybe don't need to do in the same way in the future. Alec, have you got, from an internal Microsoft use case point of view, or even when working with clients, like a kind of a standout example of where you've seen AI directly influence, a deal outcome? And it can be a specific deal, Alec, or you can, maybe it's been a tail effect into a pipeline velocity. But I'd be very curious to see if you've got like a kind of a famous war story of something that was implemented and how it drove either, a team's quarterly result or a very specific outsized deal or some example like that.
Yeah, there's one I'll give you. It's not like specific to a deal. It's more of an impact to a broader set of deals. So we've got like multiple AI agents that the field can use. It really saves them time. We came up with one which is just like a sales research agent, and there was like a really big impact there to the field. So whenever I talk about like increases that we've had to like our pipelines, that we had a 15% increase in opportunity conversion, it's because of like that type of agent. And so what we saw is that our field was spending a tremendous amount of time gathering data, whether it's external or internal, and getting it into one place to try to make a decision. So like an example I'll give you is that we have the sales research agent. Like someone might do a Google search on their company, and they might mainly go through and look at all of the different contacts that they're having with an organization. They're going to host a meeting to say, hey, what contacts have you had with an organization? And then maybe that's a week later. And then at the end of that week, they've got a pretty comprehensive list in front of them where they feel like they can make a decision that's going to help them either go create an opportunity, close an opportunity, or make some type of decision. And so what we said is, okay, we have one person using all of these different AI agents. Let's make one AI agent that's sales focused, and it's going to be connected to what Microsoft calls is just work IQ. So it's going to be connected to your emails, to your Teams chats, to your system of record. For us, it's Dynamics CRM, and to various other data sources that are all interconnected within our ecosystem. And it's got 5 or 6 different orchestration agents that this one agent is orchestrating. And so with that 15% increase for us, what it did was it said, hey, you now have one person that can do 1 or 2 prompts, get everything they need, and something that used to take a week and a lot of hours from various different people down into a couple of minutes. And it feels like whenever you print that use case out, it feels like you don't really see the impact until you see the numerical impact. And I think we take a lot of things for granted right now with AI too, meaning on the Microsoft side, we are so used to being able to tell an agent to go do or get 5 or 6 different things within 2 minutes, and it pulls back, and now we instantly have that. Microsoft has really been able to accomplish a lot more than we ever would have with these type of AI solutions, purely because of time. And our sellers aren't wasting time. Our sellers aren't going in and wasting other people's time, maybe most importantly in a sales organization. And so that's a very specific use case for us where that AI agent has really helped us increase quite a bit of revenue.
Let me ask you a question. We've talked a lot about sort of pilots, what's working, what you've seen scale, but you must have some interesting examples of the wired, wacky and wonderful. So got any examples, Alec, of something that you thought was a very unusual, but surprisingly practical workflow or use case that somebody put agents to work on? How anything spring to mind or anything you would share?
I'm trying to let me think in the sales space. There's a couple things that do come to mind. I think we talked about the real-time competitive intelligence already, but one thing is that we created just internally an AI agent that so if a seller, maybe they have 8 different accounts, the only thing that it would do is it'd go through and it would get all of the publicly available stock information. So if you were going to go purchase a stock on an organization, everything you would need to know, that's all the AI agent would do. And it would just surface this as part of a data point for the seller. And what it turned into is that our sellers started using it to create these in-depth, sometimes 10-page documents that was something you would go see McKinsey do, right? This in-depth thing on their company. And so what was interesting is generally when we deploy these tools, a rule of thumb is you don't want to change the seller's workflow, right? That's where you kind of see success. If you go in and change the seller's workflow, they're not going to adopt it. This was so outside of their workflow, and they kind of created and started doing this on their own. And it was kind of exponential. So that was kind of surprising for me where we saw a value. The other one is this is going to seem very, very simple, but we have a thumbs up and a thumbs down with any of our AI responses. So it's for us, it's a feedback loop. And we started an initiative to increase how often we were simply doing that. And what it did for us is I thought, okay, if we do thumbs down 50% of the time, we're going to start changing the responses. But what that did for us was it said, okay, on the things that we're getting a thumbs down on majority of the time, it wasn't how the AI responded, it was poor data. So what we found is that all of our data on the thumbs down, it was garbage. So it's garbage in and garbage out. So what we started doing is when we saw the thumbs down, we would go through and say, okay, well, what's the source of information that the AI was using? 9 times out of 10, that source was always old data, incorrect data in the wrong place. And so we went from millions of articles to hundreds of thousands of articles because we were able to find and consolidate down that data. And so that was a standout for us as well.
Okay, Tim, I'm going to jump into section 5, right? Maybe just 1 or 2. We've covered a lot. So maybe just 1, maybe 2 questions out of this section, which is kind of future looking. Okay. Alec, let me ask you, as you look forward to sort of 2027 and the future, right? We've certainly seen a lot of the industry try and differentiate itself. Certainly from a talent point of view, there are leaders in the market, sort of competing based on how AI centric they are. How far do you think we are from, individuals claiming AI and their understanding of it and implementation of it as a superpower, as a differentiator. How far are we from where that might be today for it to be kind of an expected norm where, sales leaders are not going to be able to differentiate themselves by saying how native they are? You think that's this year? You think that's next year? Or do you think that was even last year?
I feel like this is a good question because I feel, and I'm curious if you agree with this, Anthony. I feel like the goalpost is moving. And what I mean by that is if you think of like a Turing test or like tests where we used to say like, hey, AI is going to be where we ultimately going to be. If you would have said that 4 years ago, and then you look at the tooling we have now and you gave it to somebody 4 years in the past, they would say, I couldn't tell that was an AI, right? Like in my opinion, if they chat with ChatGPT, I think if they didn't know what ChatGPT was, you could fake that that's a person, maybe an awkward person, but a person nonetheless. Would you agree with that? Do you think the goalpost is changing on this a little bit?
I think it's totally changed. I think the instances of being able to get in and knock on the door of the C-suite and kind of share the story about the pilot you're running, to build your own brand as a kind of a proactive future leader. I think that knock on the door has lost a lot of its impact now, where really I think the C-suite are not turned on by what you're cooking or experimenting or how kind of current or proactive or modern you are. It's really what does it do? What's it worth? So I think just being able to claim to be some sort of futurist of the sales organization based on what is possible, it doesn't get you as far as being able to have the actual clear case of what you've done and how it created the impact. And for me, that's kind of like a kind of maturing of this whole category where I think the hype is dissipating. And now I think, the C-suite and even senior revenue leaders are really looking for, just like you said at the top, like what is the value impact? How long does it take? And, what's the compare and contrast case?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think like to answer your question a little bit differently because the goalpost is moving, there's two things that kind of come to mind. I think that there's like a top 1% of super users here. Like what I mean by that is that I have peers I work with where we're in group chats of things that we're building and doing with Microsoft tooling that's not even a product feature yet, and we share it all the time. And then you've got the next layer of the topper funnel, which is maybe the top 20%. And that funnel is using all of the features rapidly, right? Like they're adopting it. I can see a very clear difference in my field teams by people adopting these features and that aren't. Sometimes that resonates in a KPI that I've already told you, but honestly, sometimes they just look like rock stars. Do you know what I mean? Like I had one of my sellers go through and he built his own agent and orchestration agent for like prospecting, and it just blew my mind. And then he presented it to his team and it blew their mind. And it's like, he presented that to them 4 months after he had been using it to say like, hey, look at the value that I got out of it. But for those 4 months, he just looked like he was running circles around them. And I think there's a lot of that happening that like we're not even quantifying in the sales space because we have people just rapidly adopting this and using it, and it's making them better sellers and they're doing better than their peers. And it kind of goes back to like what we were talking about before, where you see a competitive advantages in whole organizations. I see it in very specific field teams where we have 15 sellers on a team. I know which ones are using AI really well and then which ones are still trying to do things the old way. Like it's very visible to me.
Well, Alec, I really enjoyed the conversation. One of the things that we're doing as a kind of a wrapping up the session is kind of a fun quick fire round, right? So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions just to cap us off. And I want you to give me your sort of immediate instinctual answer, just off the top of the head, right? Okay. So if I was to ask you what you think is the biggest myth about AI in sales, how would you describe it?
That it's going to replace salespeople. I think it's just going to replace tasks. It's never going to replace relationships. That would be my myth.
Yeah, love that. If AI could take one thing off every seller's plate tomorrow around the world, what should it be?
You should never have your seller manually entering data into a CRM system. If your sales team is entering data into a CRM system manually, then you're far, far behind.
Yeah, amen and hallelujah to that one. Alec, one word to describe the future of sales in 2027.
Augmented.
And our last one piece of advice for a CRO who's out there today and kind of just overwhelmed with the AI noise. They're hearing use cases internally. They're trying to keep up with their competitors. They're trying to implement suggestions that their CEO is pushing down on them. If you had like one piece of advice, how would you describe it?
Pick one workflow, measure the impact, and then scale it from there. So it's like, how do you eat elephants one bite at a time? So if you're feeling overwhelmed, pick one thing, define a process to clearly measure and implement that one thing, no matter how small it is. Make sure you know the return on value you're going to get that win, and use it to scale the next one.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Alec, I've really enjoyed our time together. Really want to thank you. So the open invite, if you're ever in Dublin for pints with me, is it's an evergreen offer. I look forward to hopefully catching up with you in person somewhere around the world. But thanks for joining me today, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. I enjoyed it as well. I appreciate it.